Amen. I don't know how many of you guys have this situation where you go to bed some nights and you lay down and the brain won't turn off, And everybody's snoring around you, but you're just rolling around in bed, and all these things are bubbling up. And it's weird how some of those things are bubbling up, what some of those things are. Some of those things you find yourself fretting about. I mean, it could be stupid stuff. Did I leave the meatloaf out? Or did I put it back in the refrigerator? And rather than get up and go check, you just lay around in bed and just worry, right? Other stuff is maybe relational. I said that to that person. How did they interpret that? Did they think I'm mean? Did they think I'm stupid? And we begin to wrestle with those kinds of things and get that kind of unrest. Sometimes it's financial. Oh man, I don't know if I got enough in my bank account. And of course, there's nothing we can do about it. We just roll around in bed and fret about it. Those are things I call disruptors. They disrupt our normal flow of life, and they get us bugged and irritated, and we have far less sleep when we wake up in the morning, and so we're grouchy all day, and nobody can understand what's wrong with us. But it usually comes from very similar things. When people begin to get agitated and worry and fret, it's almost always, if you look at the top 3 or 4 things that people worry about, it's almost either money issues, health issues, family issues, criticisms that they receive or perceive that they're getting, regrets. Why did I ever think that was a smart thing to do? And they come back and they haunt us and they wrestle with us. It's really the quest for the peace of mind. And by the way, some people wrestle with this in a tremendous way. They never speak about it. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and go, well, you want to know why I tossed and turned all last night? We just keep those things to ourselves. But, there is a giant business. It's a $225 billion business trying to help people find peace of mind. They pay to talk to somebody. They pay to get advice. They buy self-help books to try to not be agitated in their souls, to give their hearts some peace, to give them some advice that will make their life feel like it's on the right trajectory. But it's interesting. I had a really interesting, candid conversation with a guy that he's got all the letters behind his name in the behavioral health world. And he sat down with me. This is just a month or so ago. He sat down with me and he said, "You want to know something?" He goes, "All the money people spend, all the time that they spend in counseling, all that kind of stuff," he says, "it barely works. It barely works." He said, "The thing that I've seen work better than anything else is the thing that they don't ever talk about in most behavioral health things. It's when people come to grips with who God is and who He wants to be in their life." He says, "That's what I see working. The rest of this stuff, it's a giant industry." And he was part of it. But he says, it really doesn't work. People go out and feel a little better for a little while, and then they oftentimes go right back. So this morning, we're going to be looking at a really simple verse. And by the way, the prophet Jeremiah, he sort of had this a long time ago. He said this, he goes, "They've healed the wounds of my people lightly." They just put a little bandage over a deep wound, rubbed a little ointment in it, saying, "Peace, peace, you're good, it's good." Where there is no peace. So there is a solution to that turmoil, and it's found right here in Matthew in this one simple statement from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:9. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called children of God." Now, if you heard me talk about this idea of blessed before, a lot of people think, that's good for you. You get it, generally it's kind of cool. You're sort of happy, but it's a lot deeper and more involved in that. In fact, the Amplified Version, which takes the Greek words and blows them up so we get a better version, looks like this: is blessed, which means enjoying inevitable happiness, spiritually prosperous, with life joy and satisfaction in God's favor and salvation, regardless of their outward condition. That's blessed, by the way. That's a mouthful. But it's bigger than just being, you're going to be okay. It's cool with it. You get a happy face sticker. This is a whole radical idea of what happens to a person, regardless of their outward condition, are the makers and the maintainers of peace. When you read it, for they shall become called the sons of God. When you read this in a lot of the simple versions, they just say the peacemakers. But that actually, from the Greek, means people that move towards creating peaceful situations, and then they make sure that they keep continuing. The makers and maintainers of peace. Peace, of course, is just simply the idea of a state of tranquility, security, or wholeness. It's the Hebrew word shalom, okay? That you're not wrestling with things. You're not spinning over in your bed worrying. That you have a sense that everything is fine, that you're taken care of. There's a solid foundation in your life. And it's a kind of security like a father gives their child. Child might be scared that things are going bump in the night, and a father comes in and takes the child in his arms. He goes, I got you. Nothing is going to get you as long as you're in these arms. And every little kid I know, the minute their father does that, they go, because they rest in that strength and that power and that promise and that security. But there's two directions of being a maker and maintainer of peace. And it goes two different directions. The first way it goes, there's a vertical piece, okay? And the vertical piece is the important piece of the puzzle, because without the vertical piece, you really can't get the horizontal piece, which goes towards people. Because the human heart, every human heart, is ultimately at war with God. Every single one of us in some context is in open rebellion. And the result is that we live in a culture with more opportunities, more luxuries, more privileges than any other culture ever in the world. And yet millions and millions of people toss around in their sleep at night because they're not at peace. They've got everything they ought to have to make their life easy, simple, all the tools at their access. And there's still a restlessness that they can't seem to get rid of. Because it's peace, peace, but there is no peace, because the only real way for human beings to get peace is unconditional surrender to God. Unconditional surrender. It's the pathway to peace. And it's not only the pathway to peace for us, but we might find that we become the pathway to peace for somebody else who struggles with this whole idea of being in turmoil and not knowing how to get out of it, feeling like they're trapped in some way. We become that person that allows that God to speak through us into that person's life. And unconditional surrender is a really tough thing. I want to introduce you to a guy, you might have heard his story. Hiru is his name, okay? Onoda, you got a picture of him here, Lucas? There he is. He's a Japanese soldier. And he was stationed in the Philippines. And when the war was over, and people would come up where he was at, and he was with a bunch of his friends. They say, hey, the war's been lost. Okay? The Japanese have surrendered unconditionally to the Allied forces in World War II. He didn't believe it. He did not believe it. And so he said, I'm still on my mission. And even though the whole society was changing around him, and every once in a while, the guys that he were in would go try to steal stuff, and they'd get shot and killed. And people would go out into the jungle and yell out for him to come and surrender. He wouldn't do it. It wasn't until 1974 when they finally got his captain to come out. The captain had been who'd long since just become a bookseller in Tokyo. And they got him to go back into the jungles in the Philippines and say, you don't have to fight anymore. This war has been over for 29 years. Then he finally, and this is a picture of him finally surrendering in his old beat-up World War II uniform coming out of the jungle. And we go, How crazy is that? But there are a lot of people who've been fighting God's unconditional surrender for decades. And all their life does is get more complicated. And it took a journey of somebody he trusted to be that person to offer him peace. You might be that very person who is the peacemaker in somebody's life, who has the words and the authority to speak into their life and go, you know what? I surrendered. You need to surrender as well. Stop holding out on God any longer. Turn your life over to him. So that vertical peace is something, unless we have it ourselves, unless we allow God to take every area of our life, nothing held back, nothing hidden, nothing buried, and say, God, you have my life, the totality of it. It's yours. Do what you want with it. It's really going to be difficult for us to find peace and be difficult for us to be a peacemaker in the lives of other people. Because a lot of people might resent even our message of surrender. And by the way, Jesus warned us about that people would hate us because we've surrendered our lives to Christ. There are some people who just don't want to have the olive branch extended to them. But that's our job, is to extend the olive branch to somebody, regardless if they're open to it or not, and just keep saying, hey, I'm a messenger of God's peace. There's a guy named Pat. And Pat, Bernie, you might remember Pat. Pat used to surf in the same place I surf all the time. And I've known him for decades. I've been here 36 years. I've known him almost from the very time I've got here. In fact, I used to pick up his kid in junior high and take the kid surfing with me. But Pat was never friendly towards me, okay? I'd see him in the water. I'd see him walking, on the trail or whatever. And I'd say, hey, Pat. And he said nothing, okay? All right, the guy is deaf mute. I don't know. He doesn't want to talk. All right, I get it. And then one day it changed. Pat began to talk to me. I'd see him on the trail. I go, hey, Pat. He'd go, F you. Now, look, I could swear to you this. I never dropped in on the guy. I never burned him on a wave. But he started talking to me. What is with this guy? So I decided I was going to lavish compliments on him. And he'd get a good wave, go, Pat, that was a great wave. And he'd go, F you. I'd see him anywhere I walked. Hey, Pat, how you doing? F you. How are the waves today, Pat? F you. You want to know the end of the story? He kept saying F you. That's it. That's the end of the story. He never changed, right? He never changed. Because some people are so tied up in their own bitterness or their own and I have no idea where this was coming from, that I'm not the instrument that God was going to be using to get to Pat. I don't think. Okay? Because we extend the branch doesn't mean that everybody's going to take it. That's why Paul writes to the Romans, he says, listen, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. In other words, you do what you can do. They may not receive it. They might be hostile to you their whole life for reasons you don't even understand. But you do what you need to do. And then it goes to the horizontal, okay? Because being a peacemaker is really, really hard work. Because in the end, people are constantly irritating. They're always coming up with dramas. Some of them are cruel or downright mean. Some of them are selfish. Some of them turn into hermits or get into bitter little groups. And that's just here in the church, Gets even worse outside. And our job is not to get sucked into that world, but to do the hard work of a peacemaker. And it's especially true in a family situations. You ever notice that the more intimate a group of people is, the crueler things they can say to each other? That a husband and wife can say some horrible things that to each other that they would never say to an associate, a work associate, or a friend. People can be really, really cruel, even in the Christian community, and really mean. And God calls us to be peacemakers. And the Bible gives a ton of instructions on the how of being a peacemaker. And so this might be a time to get your notepad or your phone out if you want some stuff, because this is going to get real practical, not just theoretical, but real practical, right down where we live in everyday life. I want to give you some tips on how you can be, if you have peace with God already established in your heart, how you can be a peacemaker in all the situations, the social ones, whether it's school, whether it's work, whether it's church, whether it's family. Tips on being a peacemaker, okay? Tip number 1, be the first one to seek peace. You know, ever notice there's an argument, if there's a standoff, you're always waiting for the other person to break? You say, I'm sorry first. No, you say you're sorry first. And you're going to fight about who needs to say they're sorry first. Be the first one to go, you know what? I put my arms down. I want peace. Be the first one to do that. Make it the initiative. Even if the wrong is only 10% on your side and 90% on theirs, be the first one to seek peace. Keep short accounts. Ephesians says this, don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry, because that gives a foothold to the devil. Or in simple terms, keep short accounts. And if that thing that person has done or said gets taken care of, it needs to get taken care of right now and then not brought up anymore. Not added to the list that we bring up every time we want to do that. We want to get on that person's case. We keep short accounts. We don't hold on. We don't grind on it. We deal with it immediately. Keep short accounts. And especially in a family, you know. Husbands and wives never should go to bed without resolving their issues, which means that somebody has to go first and say, okay, I want peace, all right? And don't be a Martha. Remember Martha? Her deal was she couldn't let go of stuff. Every hill was a hill to die on, okay? And Jesus' response to her was, Martha, Martha, you worry about everything. Everything's a big deal to you. When in the end, there only will be one thing that's a big deal to you. And your sister figured that one out. You're back there fretting about stuff, getting all tied up in knots, and you come out here and you break up my teaching in order to have me chew out your sister when you're the one that's got it wrong, because you can't die on every hill. Go figure out the hill to die on. It's not that one. Now, as I was jotting down these ideas, I thought, man, there's a whole bunch of things that in relationships and how we deal with each other, especially in marriage relationships. Some of you guys who aren't married yet, take notes on this because these will be really helpful in the future for you. But I thought of Gary and Nancy Stack. And you guys remember Gary and Nancy Stack? Okay. They were part of our community for a long time, and their whole job was to do what they do 24 hours a day. Their whole job is dealing with people that are clashing. They are consummate peacemakers. They step into situations and try to give people good advice on how to relate to each other, how to be a peacemaker. So I called them up and I go, hey, give me your top 5 tips about how to be a peacemaker. In fact, send them to me on a video. And so, courtesy of Gary and Nancy, here are some of their top tips as professional counselors on how to be peacemakers, especially in a marriage relationship. Here we go.
Greetings, KCF family.
Hey, everybody. We miss you all. I'm Gary. This is Nancy Stack. We are former KCF alumni, and we certainly miss you all and miss Kauai.
We're marriage family counselors, and we're going to tell you some tips, practical tips for how to be a peacemaker in all your relationships, marriages, and your friendships, teachers, parent to child, child to parent.
First off, always speak the best and the thinking of the best about the person. Don't even let your thoughts go to negativity. If you dwell on the negatives to somebody, you will drift into a negative perspective about them. So discipline your mind and what you say.
So that goes to the next one, which is don't make assumptions, and when you do, and react to the assumption that you just made, check them out with neutral questions. Don't check it out with an attack or an accusation. Are you kidding? You mean that about me? How dare you? Then you've already started an argument. But you could ask, can you elaborate on that after you kind of get your anger down? So check out assumptions.
When you start talking about some issue and it starts to you see the voices start to rise, that's your cue to start implementing another technique, which is lower your voice and your pace. And you would automatically keep it down in a better tone, which will prevent you from arguing as much and being more of a peaceful discussion with your partner.
So you can decide you're not going to accuse, attack, or exaggerate once things are kind of heated. You're going to pull back from those kind of behaviors.
Another thing is to just determine ahead of time that you do not argue. Arguing will not accomplish peace, or it will not accomplish really any goal. I've never had anybody say, well, I'm glad we argued well and now I feel a lot better. It just doesn't work that way. So you can decide and think, no matter, I'm not going to argue. You're going to be more quiet.
Gary does this fabulously well. So silence is powerful and it gives the person a chance to regroup. So if I overreact to something, feel attacked or react to something he didn't even think he said, then because he's quiet and he doesn't escalate it or react to my reaction, I have time to forgive, calm down, and then ask good questions. And it's really fabulous. You just let it drop and things get better.
And one other idea, when I say silence, I don't mean silence with stink eye.
Right?
That's not the way we do it. So.
No, he kind of smiles, but I can tell he's working really hard at being silent. It's really great, and I'm learning from him. The other one is to stop trying to win. Even you competitive ones, you have to decide ahead of time that you're going to partner with the person that you're trying to be peaceful with, instead of going for the last word or being right or all those kind of things, the one-up stuff. You have to partner and give up competition.
In reality, if you and your partner are arguing and you come up with a win-lose scenario, you actually both lose, in a marriage at least. You cannot have a win-lose scenario, because if the person is losing, you're both going to be unhappy.
It's true. Generously respect differences and be kind. Agree to disagree is a really good, it sounds kind of corny, but it actually works really well.
Another idea is quick to listen, slow to speak. Obviously that comes from the scripture, and listening is a discipline. Most people don't listen, they think about what they're going to say next. It takes discipline to actually listen to your partner and see what they're saying. So practice that.
And you have to forgive a lot. In any relationship, you have to forgive at least 70 times 7, sometimes in a half an hour. So plan on doing that. Use the gift from God, and also give apologies generously and do them well. Don't say, I'm sorry you feel that way, because that's not an apology. You own it, you apologize for hurting them, for the impact on their life, and you tell them you want to improve and make it better. That's an apology.
If you start discussing and it turns into an argument, it's also very good sometimes to take a break and shut it down and say, let's stop and set up another time to discuss this. So you can set up a meeting or take a time out and say, let's talk about this in an hour or 2 hours tomorrow. And then you come back together. In the meantime, make sure you're praying and saying, what did I do? What part of this can I own? Not just, boy, I wish she would be better. So take a break, come back, and start again with the emotions down into a much lower range.
And don't do it on a date night, and don't surprise your partner that you're going to have this big, gnarly discussion today. You have to let people know in advance and set it up like a business meeting, because then everybody's prepared and in the right space and prayed up. So blessings on you as you make peace everywhere. Bye for now.
Bye.
We should charge you big money for that, by the way. That's really good advice. And by the way, most of that good advice, you probably noticed, really practical. You're going, oh, I knew that. Okay? Most of it, you can find strong biblical support for. We didn't want to take the time to proof text it through, but if you're going, well, where's that in the Bible? We can show you that, the scriptural context that backs up most everything that Gary and Nancy were suggesting. But more importantly, these are things that many of us know, but we don't do well. And the people that ought to be able to do it the best are those who are the children of God. We ought to be the examples of how relationships work, of how conflicts are resolved. We ought to be the people that people can look towards and say, you know what? How do you guys manage to keep it? You're so different, but how do you guys manage to hang together? We ought to be those kind of people. It ought to be a family trait of a Christian, because for us, according to the scriptures, the peacemakers are the ones that they will call children of God, the people that God's DNA comes flowing through. And when God's DNA lives in us and through us, it gives us the capability to be a different person, to respond differently, no matter how you were raised. I'm going to end with this last story because it's pretty personal. I was raised in a house that yelled. Anybody raised in a house where okay. I was raised in a house that yelled. Whenever there was something going on, my mom, my dad, you just get yelled at, you know? And that was normal for me. So what I did was growing up is whenever I got in a fight with my brothers or sisters, I would yell, because that was normal. I would just yell at them. So you go to the house, everybody's yelling, oh, you're stupid, you know? And when I became a Christian, I began to find verses, and these are scattered all around the New and the Old Testament, behavioral verses. This is what you ought to do. This is how you ought to respond. And you heard a lot of them this morning. And I went, I'm going to try that. I want to try that. I want to be the non-yelling guy that doesn't raise his voice, doesn't swear. I want to be that guy, because I already lived in that other thing, and it was never fun. It left you feeling junk when you walked out. It left rubble of cruel things said and things coming out that people, out of tone and a volume that you just go, how did we ever get here? And so I made a commitment that I was going to try to live by the precepts of God in raising my family. And I've been pretty darn successful. If you talk to any of my 4 kids, you go, did your dad ever yell at you? And they think yelling is when I go, hey man, take out the trash. That's yelling in our house, okay? And my point to you is this: I know that some of you have had patterns that have been done to you, or maybe patterns that you've developed. But the good news in the gospel is that God comes in, and with our unconditional surrender, we hand him, this is how I've always done it. God, I don't like it. I see it's contrary to how you want me to do it. I want to change it. And it doesn't matter if anybody else in your family or your spouse, if they don't change. What we're doing is saying, God, I surrender to you unconditionally to change me and help me communicate like you would want me to communicate. Help me use the words that will create peace, that will create tranquility, that will disarm. Let those come out of me. Let me sound like a child of God. And the response that you might get might be, F you. But then again, the response you might get is something you never imagined. A change in the other person. As you begin to model how God would actually respond, and you bring tranquility into your home, tranquility in your marriage, tranquility into your workplace, tranquility amongst your friends. God has designed you and I to be the people that bring his peace. Both knowing him and then living out how he would respond, how he would have us act. That's our goal, that's our job as children of God, to carry that DNA that he's placed in us, how he lives his life through us, in our actions, in our deeds, and in our words. Let's pray, all right? Father, may we be peacemakers, not just in some broad political sense, but in real, everyday, gritty life with people who are downright annoying. people who dislike us for reasons we can't imagine, with people who are trying to pick a fight, with people who are angry because their hearts are bent and twisted. May we offer your peace to those we love, to those we meet, to those we meet on the trail. May we respond like children of God. In Jesus' name, amen. Go out and be a peacemaker. God bless you guys. Have a great, great Sunday, all right?